Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new here, my name is Miranda and I am the Enchantress of Avalon. For today's video, I've decided to do another Fairy Friday video with a bit of a twist. It will be a Fairy Tale Friday video, and I will be discussing one of my favorites, my favorite non-romantic fairy tale, and that is Little Red Riding Hood. And I don't want to just talk about the basic story. We all know the basic story. So I'm going to dig a little deeper into some alternate meanings and some allegory found within the tale. I will quickly just go over the story. Again, we all know it, but it's a story of a little girl who is taking some treats in a basket to her grandmother's house. Her grandmother lives out in the middle of the woods. So she's walking along this path, and in most versions, she gets distracted and decides to pick flowers, even though she was warned by her mother not to deviate from that path. She does, and she ends up meeting a wolf along the way. And she doesn't want to really interact much with the wolf, understandably so. Wolves are dangerous creatures, and this one can talk, so maybe even add a danger there. So she ends up eventually getting set right and goes to her grandmother's house. She had told the wolf what she was doing, though, where she was going, and he beat her there. He had killed her grandmother and eaten her, and was now posing as her grandmother. And that leads to the famous interaction. What big eyes you have, what big teeth you have, the better to eat you with, my dear. And the little girl also gets eaten by the wolf. Now, there are two alternate versions from there. There are versions where Red Riding Hood gets them out of the wolf herself and cuts them out. There are versions where a woodcutter or a huntsman of some sort comes in and discovers the situation and cuts Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother out of the wolf. There are also versions where Little Red Riding Hood doesn't get eaten and instead gets her grandmother out beforehand. But it's traditionally read as just a tale to tell children to make sure they don't wander off and possibly get into trouble. Hey, if you wander off in this area, someone can hurt you, someone can eat you. But there's more than that in this tale. And firstly, I was inspired by beginning to read this book by Lucy Cavendish, Magical Fairy Tales, an enchanted collection of retold tales. It is a beautiful book. It is beautifully illustrated, and on the cover is, of course, the illustration for Little Red Riding Hood, which makes this even more perfect to hold up in this video. The chapter on Little Red Riding Hood, she starts with her own retelling of the tale, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and then she has deeper origins and deeper meanings within the tale, which I found super fascinating. I'm most of the way through the book now. I've read most of the tales. Can't wait to finish it. It's awesome. But especially in Little Red Riding Hood, what I loved was her choice to have Little Red Riding Hood be much older. Instead of being this little girl who's assumed to probably be around 7, 8, 9, something like that. She's a girl on the cusp of womanhood, and she begins her cycle. And that is this triggering event. That's why she gets the red hood, because in this version, it's a much more traditional telling of this tale, in that she chose to strip away a lot of the Christian elements and go with what would have been an earlier telling and researching into what an earlier telling would have looked like, and a little bit more of a pagan aspect to it. So you have, it's stripped away from a lot of these confines of an overly Christianized society and alighting things that would have possibly taken place in earlier times. And so the concept of her getting this red hood when she becomes a woman, and traditionally the girls would wear these red hoods when they were on their cycle, and it implies that her cycle does also align with the full moon, and the moon and women's cycles are linked. Both are approximately 28 days in length, and you can, if you're a woman, track your cycle through the moon as well, which is a very deeply natural thing to do. So I loved the idea of that being kind of the triggering event in the tale. And this girl, Little Red Riding Hood, has a deep connection with her grandmother, and that's why she's traveling the woods that day. And ultimately, it's also a story about choice in Lucy Cavendish's retelling, because she brought back an earlier element that isn't found in the Grimm's telling, but this element of this choice between two paths in the woods. And one she calls the path of needles, the other one the path of pins. And the path of needles is the more treacherous path. And when the wolf first meets this Red Riding Hood, he asks her which path she's going to choose. And she says she's going to choose her own path. And of course, this is a symbol of her choosing her own path in life, wanting to live a life by her terms, not necessarily being forced into something through what her society would want of her. And she ends up choosing the more treacherous of the paths. And of course, the wolf does still go to her grandmother, but her grandmother is this wise woman in the woods. She has magic, and she knows what's going to happen. And yes, she does still get eaten by the wolf. But Red had a knife and cuts the wolf's stomach open because her grandmother had, once she became a woman, given her this blade to protect herself, because that red hood does alert any men in the community to the fact that she is now a woman. She's now technically marriageable, and she wanted her to be protected in that way. But since Red had that on her when the wolf swallowed her, she was able to cut the wolf open herself and save both herself and her grandmother. Again, this is in some earlier tellings or variants on this where she's cutting the wolf open. But I really love this whole idea that she was able to rescue herself and her grandmother. And of course, given that this is happening on the full moon in Lucy Cavendish's tale, she is alluding to a werewolf, possibly werewolf nature, especially considering this wolf can talk. So that leads me into another variant on this tale, and that is Red Riding Hood is the wolf. We see this on Once Upon a Time. Ruby, who is the Red Riding Hood character on the show, is literally also a werewolf. And in that flashback episode, when she meets Snow and it's, wolf time, and they're trying to figure out what's going on, and they suspect it's her boyfriend, it's her all along. She was always the wolf. And I loved the idea on that show of having her red hood being the thing that protected her from transforming because it was magical. I thought that was a really intriguing element. And the other version is this film. And I know a lot of people don't like this film. I actually really enjoy it. And I loved the aspect of the werewolf gene being passed, that her father was a werewolf and then eventually turns her. It's an absolutely fun and fantastic film. And give me Gary Oldman in any role. He's really fun to watch. So I thought he did a great job in this as well. And another thing that isn't actually Red Riding Hood, but as I was thinking about all of these disparate elements coming together in all of these different tellings of the tale, I also thought of this film, which is my favorite werewolf movie ever. It is Ginger Snaps, and it is, I believe it was a Canadian film. Yes, it's a Canadian film, and it is about two sisters obsessed with the morbid and the macabre, and neither of them has started their cycles yet. They've not become women, even though they're like 15 and 16, which is late to be starting your cycle. And one, Ginger, the elder of the two, gets her period for the first time on a full moon and gets attacked by this wolf that's been attacking animals. And it's because the wolf is drawn to the blood. Of course, they're outside at night and she's bleeding, so the wolf is attracted to the blood. And she goes through this huge transformation where this werewolf nature has unlocked things within her. But we do still get the little bit of a Red Riding Hood element in that we have her, she's named Ginger, which is again a reference to red and red hair. She has red hair and she is going through this werewolf transformation. And it's also that reference to the transforming from girlhood to womanhood, this reborn into the next phase of your life. And that's exactly what Lucy Cavendish was doing in her retelling. Of course, she kept hers as this, back hundreds of years ago setting. It's ambiguous in a great way. And out in the middle of the woods, where this is Canada in the 2000. It's Canada in 2000. It's set in the then modern age. So they have a different feel, but I think that the elements are brought together really nicely in both. And yeah, we have this great evolution of, is Snow White just the innocent girl, or is she the empowered badass werewolf figure as well? So I think I've said all I have to say on this topic. I'm going to bring this video to a close. If you have enjoyed my thoughts on interpretations and allegory within Little Red Riding Hood, please like, comment, subscribe, and check out my blog, whiteroseofavalon.life. I will link some blog posts that apply to this video in the description box below. And I will also link to my Discord server if you want to chat more about fairies, fairy tales, history, folklore, and anything else you think I might be interested in. And I hope you have a very great Fairy Friday. Bye now.